Before we begin our scouring process, we want to make sure to weigh the dry material that we will be scouring. I have some merino wool here and I have a small kitchen scale. I am going to tear it out, which means to essentially zero the scale so that I can have my bowl on top of the scale to hold the fabric or the fiber. And this is at about 95 grams. I have 3 skeins here, and you can always double check to make sure your skeins are roughly equivalent. This one's about 98 grams and 98 grams. So we have almost 300 grams of wool to scour, and we're going to be using the Orvus paste for scouring. You can use about 1 gram of Orvus paste per 100 grams that you want to scour. That's about 1/4 teaspoon. And so with the Orvus paste, you can sometimes just add it directly to the water if you have the water already heated up. Because we're scouring wool here, we're actually going to start with cold or room temperature water in order to not shock the wool. So beforehand, I'm going to actually dissolve the Orvus paste in some hot water, and since we have 300 grams roughly of material, I'm going to put about 3 grams into onto this scale. So I'm already up at 6 grams with just that small amount of Orvus paste, and you can see that it's fine. I have at 6 grams, I'm just gonna add hot water to this, so this fabric's gonna get extra clean because we're a little high on the Orvus paste. So I'll add water to this and stir it up, and then we'll begin our scouring process. I have the Orvus paste dissolved in some hot water, and I'm just going to be adding that into the cold water that I have ready for my wool scour. Get that last little bit of Orvus paste out of here. And unlike other materials that you might do a scour pot on your stove with the wool, as I mentioned, you want to start at room temperature. And the reason for this is that wool is really sensitive as a protein fiber to changes in temperature. So while you can bring wool up to a high temperature, you don't want to do that very quickly, and you don't want to remove it from a high temperature and put it into a low temperature. For example, taking it out of a hot pot and putting it into cold water. You want to let the temperature go up gradually and down gradually. So I have my wool, I'm going to add it, and I'll definitely be able to fit all 3 skeins in here. So you can sort of push down on the fabric as you're adding it to the bath in order to make sure it wets out thoroughly. What you want to avoid is the wool felting, and so that can happen if you're really aggressively handling the fiber while it is in sort of an alkaline or a susceptible position. That can be when it's heated. But the main way that people ruin their wool is by shocking it with a swing in temperature. That's essentially what will cause felting, which, unless you're trying to felt your wool, you generally don't want that to happen. So we have our 3 skeins in here with approximately, you would want about 3 grams of Orvus paste, or 1 gram per 100 grams of fiber that you're dyeing. And after we have this all thoroughly wetted out, we're going to just let it sit and do its thing at a small temperature increase. So what you might try for is to bring up the temperature gradually by first setting it to like low medium and then moving it a little bit higher to medium over time. Ultimately, you want to be at about 160 degrees Fahrenheit and let it be there for about 1 hour, and then you can turn it off and let the wool cool down in the bath itself. So keep it in the scour pot in the hot water, and then if you are able to, come back the next day when it's thoroughly cooled and then remove it to do a rinse in room temperature. So again, avoiding the swings in the temperature for the wool specifically. So we have that set on low medium and are going to work on preparing our cotton fabric. So we have this is already prepared for us. The cotton is already soaked inside of our scour pot, and So we're just going to actually add the scour materials to this. If you're watching this at home and you want to mix up your scour materials and stir it up very well and then add the fabric, that's totally fine. Scouring is no matter which steps you take, you are just trying to let the plant or the fabric be in there with the actual soda ash and the Synthrapol for about an hour at 160 degrees. So we'll get our materials ready for that. A lot of cellulosic or fibers and fabrics made from plant materials have a lot of sizing and waxes on them from the actual yarn and fabric preparation. So in this case, we've already added our fabric to the water and we've weighed it, and so I know that I have about 650 grams of plant material in here, or rather a fabric in here, and it's thoroughly wetted out. We wanted to make sure the amount of fabric that we could fit into the scour pot before we added our ingredients, but if you know that you have a pot big enough for the amount of fabric that you want to scour, you can add your ingredients, the scour ingredients first. So since we're scouring cotton here, we're going to use both soda ash and Synthrapol or any neutral scouring paste, like a laundry detergent basically. The soda ash, as we mentioned, is a powder, and so you want to wear a respiratory or dust mask here and goggles typically when handling. I'm not going to do that so you can hear me speak, but the rate of soda ash to add, we're going to base on that weight of fiber. So we put 650 grams of fabric or yarn in our scour pot, so we want to add 2% weight of soda ash. So if you have your calculator, you can do 650 times 0.02 for 2%. That will tell you to add about 13 grams of soda ash to your scour pot. So I've tared out my scale and I'm going to add 13 grams here, and then we are, in this case, we don't want to dirty up a bunch of pots. You could definitely add hot water to this and make sure it's all thoroughly dissolved if you're sort of worried about that. But in general, if my water is warm, I will typically just put this in the scour pot and know that it's going to really go into solution anyway. This stuff dissolves really easily. So if you're going to add water, you can always make sure that there's no more sort of powder down at the bottom, and then you can put it into the scour pot. In this case, as I mentioned, my fabric is already in here, and so now I am putting a little bit of water in the bowl to rinse it all the way out, and then going forward. Here, we're going to reuse this pot for measuring again. You don't need to get brand new containers for everything. We're going to next add the Synthrapol, and Synthrapol you can add at like a ratio of 5 or 6% weight of fiber. So in the case of our cellulose that we have, the actual cotton fabric in there is about 650 grams or about 1.5 pounds. And so we're going to add 32 grams of Synthrapol. I have to actually re-tear this because the bowl's a little wet, so make sure that if you are reusing the bowl over and over, you do tear it each time. So probably like a couple glugs. And if you are a person like me who never weighs or measures their coffee when they are making coffee in the morning, or doesn't use always the same amount of laundry detergent, you don't have to be totally perfect when you're scouring, but obviously you don't want to waste materials and you want to make sure you're using enough. So as you're just getting started in dyeing, or if you're dyeing a new type of fiber, it's great to measure just so you got a good like eyeball of how much you should add. But if you don't have a scale, don't let that stop you from like scouring your fabrics. You can just estimate a little bit. So I've dumped the Synthrapol in here, and now I can be a lot more aggressive with the cotton fabric than I was with the wool yarn. With wool, you want to be really delicate and move it gently within the pot, but here with the cotton, I can literally pull it out of the water and make sure I'm like just thoroughly wetting it out. So I am going to turn the pot on, and this one, honestly, you can just kind of go right up to a medium high. You want to be really cautious when you're scouring to not let the pot boil over. We want this at about 160 to 180 degrees to really clean the fiber, right? Scouring is supposed to be a really hot water wash, and so we're here to get a job done, and that job is get as much of the junk that's stuck in this cotton out of there. And so you want to make sure that we're using the temperature and the scouring agents in our favor to really do that. So we'll push the plant the fabric around, make sure it's thoroughly wetted out, and then let it do its thing. So once it hits about 160 to 180 degrees, you can let it stay at that level, making sure it doesn't boil over, and hold it there for at least 1 hour. If you have fabric that's really letting off a lot of oils, or the liquid itself looks really dirty, that can mean a lot of things. A lot of fabric that you're going to buy these days is called PFD, or prepared for dyeing. That means that someone else has probably, the fabric manufacturer has already treated it to make it ready for dyeing. That doesn't mean it's prepared for natural dyeing. So a lot of cases you can get a PFD fabric and still get a lot of benefit out of scouring it, and that's really what we're going to recommend for the best results, because scouring is a relatively low cost way of treating your fabric compared to dyeing it, but it really improves the results even when you're getting PFD fabric. So what we'll show you next is a way of kind of scouring your material in a little bit of a lazier fashion, and it works best with either PFD material or silk, and that's going to be in the washing machine. So as you might expect, your washing machine doesn't boil or get close to boiling. It's going to be a hot water wash, but it is a way, if you're trying to process a ton of fabric, to get the benefits of scouring without sort of like the labor intensiveness of being over your stove and having to fill up your kitchen with boiling solution. So in general, the best preparation you can do is the stovetop sort of scouring by hand. For wool, you cannot put it in the washing machine. That's just much too aggressive for your material. But if you have a really clean fabric, or like you're re-dyeing something that used to be a favorite garment of yours that you've worn a million times, and you know that most of this kind of naturally occurring oils and dirt that was found in the fabric processing have probably been washed out, then you can do the scouring step in the washing machine instead, and that's what we'll show you next. For scouring in the washing machine, we're going to use just Synthrapol. This is something that you can do when your fabrics or fibers are relatively clean. We definitely don't recommend scouring in the washing machine when you're doing wool, just because it's way too much abrasion on the fiber itself. The typical recipe for a washing machine scour is about 1/8 of a cup of Synthrapol. I didn't want to put it in my measuring cup, so I have 1/8 of a cup of water here. I'm just literally doing this to try to get a sense of how much should I put into my cup. So I'm going to put it up to about the bottom of this L, and that will tell me that I have 1/8 of a cup of Synthrapol. So you can obviously wash this out well and use your measuring cup, but I'm going to use this method instead so that I have a way to add hot water to really well dissolve the Synthrapol before I put it into the washing machine. So here I've already heated up some hot water, and I'm just going to put it in here to let it kind of go into solution really well. And then I've already put the fabric and some water into this washing machine, and what I like to do is add the fabric in a way while it's filling up, so you can really make sure that all of your cotton is like sort of spread around the agitator of the washing machine. I don't have as much experience scouring in like sort of side load or front load washing machines, so this obviously is a top loader. So what we're going to do is turn the water back on, and then the Synthrapol I can kind of add to the water as it's filling up the basin a little bit more, and that will help it go around. And then we're just going to kind of move the fabric around to really spread this out as it goes. Getting very soapy in there, and obviously you can see the steam coming off. I am doing this on the hot water setting, so scouring is done best in hot temperatures, and so that's something you'll want to do here. If for some reason your washing machine gets insanely hot, then be careful with silk. You definitely don't want to let silk get above 160 degrees Fahrenheit, or it will lose the luster that causes silk to be so pretty and shiny. So I've got a ton of foam in here from the Synthrapol, and basically instead of having to stir this around with the tongs a lot like you would in the washing machine, I mean on the stovetop, the washing machine agitator will do the job. If you want to give your fabric a little more time in the washing machine, once it's started agitating, you can always use a handy trick of keeping the lid open to let it sort of sit for a little bit longer in the detergent itself. In general, you want to make sure that the suds and the cleaning agents in the Synthrapol have a lot of room to move around and penetrate all the different parts of the fiber, just because, you know, to get the most even dyeing, you need the best fabric preparation that you can have. Once we're done filling the basin and we have the fabric and the Synthrapol added, we can literally just let the washing machine run on its normal agitation cycle. You'll obviously have to shut the lid for it to do that. And then it's really up to you if you want to sort of try to re-agitate a second time if you think that the fabric was really not that clean, or that it needs more time, or just let it go through the normal rinse cycle of your washing machine. Certainly in this case, you know, I put it to as long a load as I can, just to give it the most time, and definitely run it on hot. And if you have a lot of fabric in there, certainly put it up to the largest load size that you have. You can always also, if you think that the temperature of your washing machine is not that great, you can definitely add hot water to the wash basin. So certainly that's an option if you think that the temperature setting at your washing machine is not really high enough to give a vigorous scouring.